Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
All right, once again, this is Brad Powers filling in for Todd Fuhrman and Payne Insider as we continue our preview series for the upcoming 2024 season. We are previewing the Group of 5 conferences. 2 conferences down already, 3 to go, and today we are talking Mountain West football. And speaking of the Mountain West, I think the major storyline for the Mountain West is a season of transition. This is a conference that has 6, that's right, half the league has a new head coach this season. That is the most in any season in the 26-year history of the Mountain West. So a lot of coaching turnover. Obviously, that brings, in today's day and age with the transfer portal and NIL, a lot of roster turnover. So a lot of unknown question marks when it comes to the league. And we'll see if we can attack it and find some value when it comes to the Mountain West. And we will have, at the end of this podcast, a Mountain West specific best bet season win total. So make sure you're checking that out at the end of the podcast. Storyline number 1 is that coaching turnover. I would say storyline number 2 in the first year of the expanded college football playoff. Can this conference finally make its way back to the top of the G5? Because Boise State obviously was the flag bearer for this conference for so many years. In fact, Boise State was the first Group of 5 representative when they did the first year of the New Year's Six, and they gave an automatic berth to any the top-rated conference champion out of the Group of 5. Boise State way back in 2014 was that first Group of 5 rep. The conference hasn't been to a major bowl bid since. So we'll see. Is it Boise State this year? Does UNLV continue their upwards trajectory? Does Fresno State rebound? We'll see if there is a team. I'm here to tell you, I think there is a team. In fact, I think there's a very strong chance that that streak might end this season. But before we get to that team, you know what we do here as far as if you've been listening to the first couple of previews, is the Group of 5 2024 preview series. We start at the bottom of the league and work our way towards the top. At the bottom is one of those teams with a new coach. It is New Mexico. And a familiar name comes back to New Mexico. But before we get into that, Lobos, last year, Danny Gonzalez was their head coach. They fired him. I was a little surprised by it. The fact that they only gave him 4 years. I thought Gonzalez was given dealt a very tough hand because his first couple of years, New Mexico was severely limited in 2020 and 2021. New Mexico as a state had very strict COVID policies. Remember, New Mexico had to practice and stay here in Las Vegas during the 2020 season because of those COVID policies. They had a lot of off-season practice issues the following year in 2021. And I thought last year was his best team. I know they only went 4-8, but statistically they were okay. They actually outgained their opponents on the season. So the fact that he got fired after his best season, maybe there was something else going on. And, I can only speculate, but, if you do know and we're following closely as far as the betting scene goes, there was a game last year with New Mexico and UNLV. Off-field rumblings, a lot of line movement, a very precarious line movement on a game day. Maybe there was something that didn't set well there. I'm not sure. But obviously Danny Gonzalez is out. Insert Bronco Mendenhall, which is an upgrade, to say the least. Obviously Bronco's got a ton of experience. He's won 135 games in his career as a head coach at BYU in Virginia. In 17 years. He was originally, if you go way back in the day, dating myself here, a quarter century, but he was a defensive coordinator here under Rocky Long in the late 90s, early 2000s. He's been off the last 2 seasons, re-energizing. He did hire 2 familiar faces that he's very familiar with. Jason Beck, who's the starting quarterback at BYU under Mendenhall, and most recently Syracuse's OC. The new DC, Nick Howell, was a DC at BYU under Mendenhall. Most recently Vanderbilt's DC the last 2 years. So an experienced coaching staff. a coaching staff that's very familiar with one another. I think it's, even though I was a pretty big Danny Gonzalez fan and thought he didn't get dealt a fair hand, this is an upgrade on the coaching staff. Now, there will be some work cut out for this coaching staff as far as the lack of returning personnel. Only 9 returning starters for New Mexico. They lose their quarterback, Dylan Hopkins. But that Dampier kid got plenty of snaps last year. In fact, he had a 6.0 touchdown interception ratio, and he's actually more of a runner than a thrower. He was the 3rd leading rusher on the team. He looks like the clear-cut starter this year. He got most of the snaps in the spring. They're very comfortable with him. Didn't even really look out to go in the portal post-spring, so that tells you that they like their quarterback. One guy that I really liked on tape, rewatching some games from last year, their running back, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Guy had topped 1,000 yards last year, ran for 17 touchdowns. You look at Pro Football Focus, and I know sometimes it PFF leaves a lot to be desired, but still, it is a measuring tool, and I think the value is greater than 0 when it comes to something like that. I'm getting to the point I'm getting to is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt last year for New Mexico, their running back, 3rd highest graded running back in the country. Ashton Genty at Boise State was number 1. Audric Estime at Notre Dame was number 2. Merritt transferred to Arizona. Big pickup there for Arizona. Obviously, Estime is off to the NFL. And Krosky-Merritt, leaves some big shoes to fill here. I did like what I saw from Andrew Henry on tape. He withdrew his name from the portal. This is a kid that averaged 6.7 yards per carry. He's back. They welcome in a couple of Power 4 transfers. So I think they're okay at running back. It's a slight downgrade, but not a big one. 2 of their top 3 wide receivers are gone, and Jeremiah Hickson and DJ Washington. I thought Hickson was their second best skill position player behind the running back Krosky-Merritt, but he's gone. Medford does return. He led the team in receiving last year, but there's certainly some more questions than answers when it comes to the receiving position. I think they're going to be more of a run-heavy team than pass. Concerned about the offensive line. 0 returning starters on the offensive line. Had some legit players, too. Their offensive tackle, J.C. Davis, was the 4th highest graded offensive lineman in the country. 4th highest. Keep in mind the top 2, Joe Alt and Fuaga from Oregon State, went in the top 15 in the NFL draft. Davis transferred to Illinois. 2 others on the offensive line transferred to Purdue and Arizona State, respectively, so there was some talent on that offensive line. Coming out of spring, it looks like all 5 starters are going to be transfers. 3 of them are coming from the FCS ranks, but all of them, even though they have 0 returning starters from the unit last year, all 5 of these kids have started elsewhere. So that is the benefit of the transfer portal era. You can bring in some experienced guys, even if they're not experienced, to your own team. On defense, let's flip over to that. Top tackler transferred to Kansas State, Marenko. Their top cornerback, Dante Martin. He was an all-conference type of player. He departs. Good news is, again, a couple of key players withdrew their name from the portal. Christian Ellis, Tavian Combs. Tavian Combs, to me, stood out, particularly in the A&M game in the season opener that I was watching a few months ago. I also liked what I saw from Dimitri Johnson. They're high on this cornerback transfer from San Diego State, Noah Avinger. Up front, Gabriel Lopez, Kyler Drake return. They got some experience there. They combined for 10 tackles for a loss last year. They really like this Weber State kid off the edge. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, but it's Okiki is his first name. He's from Weber State. They liked what they saw from him in the spring. So there's stuff to work with. When you got 7 returning starters on defense, and you got a guy that's obviously well-versed on the defensive side of the ball as a head coach, and you got an upgrade as a head coach, there's some pieces to work with. What's concerning, though, is it's the toughest schedule in the country among group of 5 teams. Again, toughest schedule among group of 5 teams. New Mexico, most likely an underdog in every single game. Probably at least a touchdown underdog in 11 of the 12 games. Win total, historically low. You don't see this every year. 1.5. In fact, this is something you see normally maybe every 3-4 years. 1.5 win total. We are going to get back to that. Hint, hint, wink, wink at the end of this podcast. We'll talk more New Mexico. But let's scroll up to the next team. Another team with a new head coach. Another team that really struggled. Nevada. The Wolfpack. Worst team, actually, in the FBS statistically last season. The Wolfpack were negative 2.3 yards per play in the country. Dead last. Minus 142 yards per game. Dead last. Outscored by 16 points per game. That's number 130 out of 133 teams last year. They were minus 24 in sack margin, minus 2 yards per carry margin, ranked in the bottom almost every single basic offensive, defensive categories. Nevada was in the bottom 10. So they were statistically the worst team in the country last year. They let Ken Wilson go after only 2 years, but they were 2-10 both years. That was arguably the worst back-to-back years in the history of the school. I mean, this has got a pretty good, history. Particularly, you got a Hall of Fame coach for 30-plus years, and Chris Salt. Nevada's not used to going 4-20 in back-to-back years. New head coach Jeff Choate comes from Texas. He was the co-DC and the inside linebackers coach there the last few years. He also was the Montana State head coach from 2016 to 2019. He had some success there, particularly in his final season. His last team finished number 4 in the FCS, went to the semifinals. He's the one that got that ball rolling there at Montana State as far as being one of the better FCS programs in the country here recently. So I think it's a good hire. It's an upgrade. The new OC, a little bit concerned. Matt Lubick has leukemia, so hopefully he recovers there. We'll get him some thoughts and prayers. Mike Lynch is the interim OC. The new DC comes over from Boise State. Returning starters, a little bit more to work with than in New Mexico. They got 12. Brandon Lewis is back at quarterback. But, my goodness, only threw 2. He was a starting quarterback for most of the season, only threw 2 touchdown passes. Not in a game, not in a couple games. We're talking the entire season. In fact, Nevada quarterbacks the last 2 years, 13 touchdown passes. That's it. 2 years, 20 interceptions, 13-20 ratio at quarterback the last 2 years. Pathetic. Yeah, I mean, you could argue that's the worst, by far the worst quarterback play in the entire country the last 2 years. Big reason why they're 4-20. They bring in Chuba Purdy from Nebraska. As of right now, though, Purdy wasn't completely healthy. Looks like Lewis has the inside track to being the starter. I thought 2 of their better players on offense, Jamal Bell, he also played. He was at wide receiver. He also played some running back. He transferred to Baylor. Dalvin Campbell transferred to South Carolina post-spring. He was one of their better players last year. Kaliki Latu transferred to Washington post-spring. So they lost some key guys post-spring. Not a great look. As far as the receiver position, they really like Marshawn Brown at wide receiver. They like this West Virginia transfer, Cortez Bram. But they only have 4 returning receptions from the position from last year, so not a lot of continuity at all at that position. The positive side, running backs got 3 former Power 4 transfers in the mix. Sean Dollars for Oregon. He got injured in the spring game, but it looks like he'll be okay. Ashton Hayes was not healthy last year. He comes over from Cal. Patrick Garwo actually had a 1,000-yard season at Boston College a few years ago. He comes in. So we'll see if Dollars and Hayes are healthy. This is a pretty decent running back room. Offensive line, experienced 3 starters back. They were not good last year. Their best player was their left tackle, Isaiah World, but again, they were not good at all when it came to protecting or establishing the run last year. On the defense side of the ball for Nevada, Amani Johnson, easily their best player. He's at safety, 100 tackles, 3 interceptions. He's gone. Top pass rusher, Marcel Walker-Burgess. Tell me if you heard this. Transferred post-spring. Not good. He went to Ohio. Big pickup for the Bobcats there. A couple guys I do like that are returning. I like the linebacker Drew Watts. This guy, he came on my radar last year because Nevada had their spring game televised. I couldn't believe a Nevada spring game televised. I watched it. He stood out. Ended up being the 3rd leading tackler on their team. I like a couple of transfers, again, from Power 4 programs. Jackson LeDuc from Oregon. He's been there a couple years. He hasn't been healthy. Henry Ikahifo from Cal. He couldn't play last year. He's a couple of names you need to know on defense that I think will be major contributors this year. Texas transfer Keaton Crawford comes over with Choate from Texas. Caden Johnson from Wisconsin, a defensive end. They expect those 2 guys to be key contributors, key starters for them on the defensive side of the ball. Special teams, I don't mention it often, talk about it often, but when you got an outlier, I got to mention it. Nevada loses their all-time kicker. Brandon Talton, 83 career field goals, most in the history of the Mountain West. So they got to avoid the fill there. As far as the schedule, very difficult. Play 13 games. 10 of those 13 games come against bowl teams from last year. They might only be favored Nevada in 1 game this year. Their win total is 2.5. I think it's a fair number. Jeff Choate is expecting Nevada to have the most improved record in college football this year. I don't see it. I think he's got his work cut out for him. Even though I like the hire, I think it's an upgrade. You got to give him a few years to get this team back to flirting with bowl eligibility. Speaking of flirting with bowl eligibility, this team I think can flirt with bowl eligibility this year. It's Hawaii. We'll go out to the islands. Timmy Chang, year 3. I think he's doing a solid job here. I was just reading in the Athlon Preview magazine. I like reading the scouting reports from anonymous coaches, and sometimes they're very forthright. this anonymous coach that they quoted in the Athlon preview on Hawaii says they're hearing that Timmy Chang might be in trouble, might be feeling some heat. I mean, if that's the case, I don't know what Hawaii's doing because I think he's doing a fine job. In fact, I thought each of the last 2 years the team played their best football at the end of the season, so there was no give up. I just watched them a couple days ago. If you follow me on Twitter at BradPowers7, I just was tweeting, a dramatic in their very last game. I mean, they had a walk-off winner to beat Colorado State. Colorado State's trying to win that game to get the bowl eligibility, and Hawaii beats them at the buzzer in the finale. So I think Chang's doing a fine job. They do have 2 new coordinators. Dennis Thurman comes over from Colorado. If you know that name, obviously he played for the NFL for the Cowboys. He's a longtime defense coordinator in the NFL. And if you follow the Colorado reality TV show, he was featured quite a bit last year. Hawaii statistically wasn't great last year, 107 in yards per play margin, number 94 in yards per game margin. But they did sign their best recruiting class in 6 years. And I think the major positive as far as coming into this season is it's one of the most experienced teams in the country. You've been hearing me the last 3 podcasts talk about all these G5 teams losing a ton of guys. Hawaii's not one of them, 18 returning starters. Shager entered his name in the portal in December for a week or two, and then he decided to withdraw. He's going to come back. He had a solid season last year, threw for over 3,500 yards, 26-14 ratio. Got to cut down on the interceptions. Rewatching tape, though, I do find it interesting. Last 4 games of the season, just so happened to be Hawaii going 3-1 in those games, they started running Shager quite a bit. He had 40 carries in those last 4 games. They were using the quarterback run game quite a bit, and that kind of opened up their entire offense. Had to because, my goodness, their biggest problem last year was their inability to run the football. They only averaged 3 yards per carry. On the offensive line, allowed 39 sacks. So putting that quarterback run game in the mix kind of opened it up for them. Shager will be the starter, but they do really like this newcomer at quarterback, Micah Alihado from Bishop Gorman. Keep an eye on him. They want to get him some snaps this year and get him ready to go. He's the quarterback of the future. I love the Hawaii wide receiver room this year. All the top guys are back. Stephen McBride really flashed last year, over 1,000 yards for him, 16.3 yards per catch, 9 touchdowns. Thought he was the best player on the team. He returns. Ashlock is another wide receiver, a very good possession receiver. He flashed immediately. If you go to their early games against Vanderbilt and Stanford, he was flashing. And they got some other guys. Their top 5-6 guys, all at receiver, all are back. You don't see that too much at the G5 level these days. Their top offensive lineman is back, Luke Felix Fualalo. I will try with these Polynesian names to do my best. A little concern for me on the offense would be a new offensive line coach. Sometimes that takes a little bit of transition period there. Defensively, again, new DC. Guy stood out to me, Peter Manuma at safety. He was their leading tackler. I can't miss him. He's number 1. He has that Troy Polamalu hair. Kind of plays like him, very aggressive. Logan Taylor, another linebacker. He probably was their best player last year, but he got injured and out for the season in week 3. He led the team in tackles a couple years ago. Was going to lead the team in tackles last year before he got hurt. He returns. Jalen Smith, who filled in for him and did a nice job, he comes back. They really like their pair of cornerbacks in Edwards and Cam Stone. So there's some pieces to work with on that defense side of the ball. And again, when you got 9 returning starters, yeah, that's a lot more experience than a lot of these other teams and coaches are dealing with in the portal era at the G5 level. Another unique thing to Hawaii this year, typically Hawaii plays 13 games. They get that exemption from the NCAA. Not going to be the case this year. They're only playing 12 games. And actually, of those 12 games, 2 are against FCS schools. So per the current bowl rules, they got to win 7 games to get the bowl eligibility. I'm not sure they get the 7 wins. They got UCLA and Washington State plus the 3 top teams in the Mountain West. I think they flirt with bowl eligibility, but to me, I think 5-7 is the most likely record. And I got to tell you, going back to the top, if 5-7 gets Timmy Chang fired, I think that's a huge mistake for Hawaii. I don't know who you're going to get to coach there. It's a very tough job at this point. Let's move it on up. Utah State, next in line. Their head coach, Blake Anderson, entering year 4. Team struggle. He came in with a bang year 1. Won the Mountain West, went 11-3. Team's just 12-14 the last 2 years. Statistically, they were a little bit better than 6 and 7. They were 57 in the country in yards per play margin, average 65 in yards per game margin. And it's been a pretty stable program here. Me growing up, Utah State was one of the worst programs in the country. But my goodness, last 13 years they made a bowl game. Chucky Keaton kind of turned this entire program around here back 10 plus years ago, and they're constantly in bowl games. We'll see if they can make a bowl this year. Our returning starters, they're experienced, especially on offense. I will say what was concerning to me is post-spring, top 2 quarterbacks, top running back, 2 defensive starters transferred post-spring. So originally, I was going to be talking about Hawaii and Utah State being 2 of the most experienced teams in the country, and particularly Utah State. But now they're pretty much average returning production when you lose 5 starters post-spring. 4 of those 5 players ended up at Power 4 programs, so significant losses. And from what Blake Anderson said, those transfers were unexpected. They weren't expecting this to happen, so that's kind of a concern for Utah State. Now, I can tell you 2 of the transfers, the reason for them was Spencer Petras from Iowa was named the starting quarterback in the spring. That led to the top 2 quarterbacks from last year hitting the portal. Faison at running back withdrew his name from the portal in the last 10 days. That's big considering he ran for over 700 yards last year. They had already, Utah State, lost their leading rusher, Booth, to the portal. So getting him to withdraw his name from the portal is big. Faison for Utah State. The guy I really like on Utah State's offense, Royals at wide receiver, over 1,000 yards, 15 yards per catch, 15 touchdowns. To me, I think he's a top 10 wide receiver at the group of 5 level. In fact, the Mountain West, you're going to hear me say it, I love the wide receivers in the Mountain West. They got 3 or 4 of the top G5 wide receivers in the country. A lot of experience coming back at that position. But unfortunately for Utah State, they do lose their other guy that was second-team All-Mountain West last year, Terrell Vaughn. The positive is the offensive line returns all 5 starters. The negative was not a good offensive line last year. They allowed 44 sacks. None of them, if you look at the PFF grades or really just rewatching tape, none of them stood out. None of them graded out well. None of them made the All-Mountain West team. So, it's great to have experience, but if none of the guys are any good, how much better are they going to get in another year? We'll see. Defense was bad last year. No question about it. Allowed 433 yards per game, over 5 yards per carry, 35 points per game. Change was needed defensively, and Blake Anderson made that change. Nate Dreeling is the new DC. He comes over from New Mexico State. He improved that unit the last 2 years. Don't believe me? Go flip on the Auburn tape from last year. New Mexico State, Auburn. That defense was flying around the football. The guy I really like that flied around the football for Utah State last year does return. Safety Ike Larson. I thought he was their best player on defense. Over 100 tackles, 4 interceptions. Their leading tackler, Tafisi, he departs, unfortunately. Speaking of being around the football, he had 142 tackles last year. Their top defensive tackle and top pass rusher are both gone. The guy they like at defensive end, Blaine Spearis, they like him in limited action last year. He's very productive, 5 sacks. You look at the schedule for Utah State, 4 tough games at USC. They host Utah. Wow, getting Utah at home. That hasn't happened very often in the last decade. At Boise State, at Washington State. To me, that 5.5 win total seems about right. And if I was I haven't bet it yet, but if I was forced bet, I'd go under there. Let's move it along to the next one. We are going to go to San Jose State. Tell me if you've heard this already. Broken record. Another team with a new coach here in the Mountain West. San Jose State. Brent Brennan departs to Arizona after 7 successful years there. Kind of a slow build he had at San Jose State. Did include 3 bowl games in the last 4 years. So he did a good job at San Jose State. Major reason why he's now the head coach at Arizona. Insert new head coach. Tell me if you've heard this name before. Ken Niumatalolo. Yeah, that's right. Niumatalolo from Navy. He's the Navy head coach for 16 years. Didn't finish good, though. 3 straight losing seasons, and he was let go. Last year, he was at UCLA. Keep in mind, if you're not familiar with it, you're thinking, he's just an East Coast guy, a military guy. Niumatalolo started at Hawaii. In fact, he played quarterback at Hawaii. He also coached at UNLV. So he's got some West Coast ties. Here's the most important thing. I think people are going to think, San Jose State going to start running the option this year? I got a very direct answer for that. No, they're not running the option this year. Niumatalolo made an interesting hire. He hired Craig Stutzman from Texas State. If you know him, he worked under Nick Rolovich for several years at Hawaii and Washington State. They are totally opposite as far as the triple option. It's he calls it the spread and shred. So more pass than run, to say the least. So no triple option here at San Jose State, even with Niumatalolo as the head coach. On the defensive side of the ball, there is some continuity there. He was able to keep Derek Odom. He's in his 8th season as the defensive coordinator at San Jose State. Defense, very aggressive. They forced turnovers, a lot of havoc. So that was a good retention there. Last year, you look at the season, slow start, very tough schedule to start, 1-5. They won 6 straight to close the regular season. I thought they were the best team in the Mountain West at the end of the season. Statistically, much better than their record. 27th in the country in yards per play margin, 44 in yards per game margin, 44 in scoring margin. I mean, if you're just looking at a basic power rating, it's probably San Jose State's second best team in the last 11 years. So, off a pretty good season, new coach, lose a ton of production. Going to take a downturn this year. In fact, returning production, they rank number 131. Only 6 returning starters. The offense, explosive last year, especially down the stretch. Cordero at quarterback, I thought he was the best player in the Mountain West. 20 touchdowns, only 4 picks. He just, just looked and moved differently than anybody, at least at the quarterback position in the Mountain West last year. He's gone. The guy's battling it out. Jay Butterfield from Oregon a couple years ago, he's in the mix. Emmett Brown from Washington State. Walker Eget from New Mexico State. Those are the guys that are in the mix at quarterback. As of right now, they don't know who. There's not a clear-cut, surefire starter coming out of spring. Top 2 backs, Robinson and Conley, they combined for over 2,000 rushing yards last year, not 2 years. Last year, over 2,000 rushing yards, 27 touchdowns. They're gone. This was a very productive rushing offense, averaging 5.6 yards per carry. So a lot of questions there. Top player back on offense, I would say, is Nick Nash, a converted from quarterback. He played wide receiver last year. Productive, over 700 yards, 8 touchdowns. They also get Justin Lockhart back. He was a good wide receiver for him a couple years ago. He was out last year with injury, so that's a positive. Not a positive is losing Sam Olsen, your projected starting tight end. He goes to Arizona post-spring. He was really impressive. I mean, popping the bowl tape. He really stood out in that one. Offensive line has hardly anybody back. They only have 1 starter, so that's a concern. And not much to work with returning production-wise on offense. Same thing goes for the defense. Top guys on defense, Parham, Trey Smith, Javion Cole, all gone. They transferred to places like Washington, Arizona, Texas. Javion Cole transferred to Texas post-spring. He was by far their highest-graded player on defense per PFF, so major loss there. The top returner up front is that Soani Toia kid. Jordan Pollard leads the linebackers. Schedule, I don't like. This was a team that I faded early in the season win total markets. I think they're only favored in 4 games. They play the top 3 teams in the conference, Boise, Fresno, and UNLV. Plus, they play 3 power schools from last year at Washington State, at Oregon State, and a much-improved Stanford team. I think it's a struggle to get the bowl eligibility, to say the least, here for San Jose State in year 1 under Niumatalolo. Next up, another team and another new coach. We're to San Diego State. And I really like this hire, to say the least. New head, and if you listen to some of the other podcasts, particularly the MAC podcast, you know that I love Sean Lewis. I really thought he got a raw deal at Colorado last year. I thought he did an awesome job at Kent State, got him to a couple bowl games. In fact, his last 4 years there, he went 22-21. Oh, that's Brad. That's 22-21. That's average. That's mediocre. Well, I mean, he leaves, and Kent State, after he leaves, becomes the worst team in the country, wins 1 game. So, I mean, we're talking one of the better offensive minds in the game today. He's going to serve as the OC. I think they're going to play with a lot of tempo. If you watch San Diego State football last decade plus, they don't play with tempo. Now they're going to go with tempo. I'm slowing it down a little bit. That should give you a hint. There'll be some value, I think, when it comes to San Diego State and individual game totals. I cannot give you a better piece of advice. San Diego State, as far as last year, before we talk this year, let's talk last year. They were not a good team at all. It wasn't a phony record. They were 118 in the country in yards per play margin, 122 in yards per game margin. It was San Diego State's worst season in 15 years. Lost 37 transfers. not much is expected. I'm a little bit more bullish, though, on this team. I know they're completely different offense. A lot of guys out. Terrible season last year. I don't know. I like some of the replacements. I think that there's an opportunity, particularly on offense, to be much better. They lose Jalen Maiden at quarterback. I mean, guy couldn't throw consistently. 10 touchdowns, 9 picks. He was their leading rusher. A.J. Duffy comes in from Florida State. He was their big get in the transfer portal. Another big get, freshman quarterback Danny O'Neal was playing well in the spring. He's their highest rated quarterback recruit in the internet era. He was originally committed to Colorado. Really good kid. He has a chance to play right away as a true freshman. Speaking of transfers, Marquez Cooper reunites with Sean Lewis. He comes from Ball State. He was originally, before he transferred to Ball State, he was at Kent State. Guy that's got multiple 1,000-yard seasons in his back pocket already. I already like their 2 other running backs, Armstead and Keenan Christian, that are coming back. So there's a lot of pieces to work with at running back. Tight end, Mark Redmond last year was one of their better players. He's off to Louisville. Good pickup for the Cards there. I do like another transfer, I think. Sean Lewis did a good job. Michael Harrison from Colorado. He flashed. Watch the tape. I know he had a lot of other playmakers on the outside, but if I know a lot of you were watching Colorado football last year, that tight end it wasn't very productive, at least early in the season, before they demoted Sean Lewis, which I couldn't believe. The top returner at wide receivers, Mekhi Shaw. They really like these transfers. Lewis Brown from Colorado State, Jashawn Polk from West Virginia. He was originally at Kent State. Again, pieces to work with at wide receiver. Offensive line's got 3 starters back, so there's some stuff to be had here on offense. They haven't finished in the top 97 in scoring offense in the last 6 years. I think they will this year. Defense, that's what San Diego State's been known the last 10-plus years. They couldn't get pressure last year, couldn't stop the run. 4 of their top 6 tacklers transferred to Power 4 schools. So there's a lot to be desired on that side of the ball. Their new defensive coordinator, Eric Schmidt, he coached defensive line and special teams the last 4 years with Kalen DeBoer. If you're on Kalen DeBoer's staff, I think really highly of Kalen DeBoer when it comes to X's and O's. So if you've been on his staff the last 4 years, I think you're a pretty good coach. Schmidt was also a longtime defense coordinator in North Dakota. They're going to run a 4-2-5. As far as their top players coming back, Cody Moon at linebacker, Alu at defensive tackle. Defensive back's probably their most experienced position group. They got 3 players that logged 200-plus snaps last year. They're back. They really like this Northern Iowa transfer, Staley, that comes in. He might be the leader on that back end of the defense, even with some experience coming back. I really like, again, broken record, like some of these pickups in the portal. Kyle Moretti, the linebacker from Central Michigan, really good player. They really also like this kid from Richmond and from the FCS, Marlon Lewis, on the defensive line. So, again, I think even though with not a lot coming back, I like what they did in the portal in a short period of time. Schedule's a little tough. At least an underdog in 6 games. Oregon State, at Cal, Washington State, at Boise, at UNLV. But I think this team clearly tops the 4-win total from last year. So that's San Diego State. Let's talk a team that's got some continuity as far as head coach. Colorado State is your next team. 6 straight losing seasons, though, for the program. And if you follow them, they spend as much as anyone in the Mountain West. They are not getting a very good ROI on the money that they spend at Colorado State. This is a very important year 3 for Jay Norvell. They were improved last year, went from 3 wins to 5. Both the OC and the DC are entering year 3. So, again, a lot of continuity compared to the other staffs in this league. Last year, they were a little bit better than the record. 70 in yards per play margin, 83 in yards per game margin, 88 in scoring margin. They should have flirted with Bulge, but they did. They came down to the last play. Whether or not, they made a bowl game. Hawaii hit a 50-plus yard field goal on the final play. 5-7 for Colorado State. That should stick that should stick and be used, obviously, as a motivating tool in the offseason, I would think. Let's talk returning experience. Quarterback Braden Fowler, Nicolosi returns. He's a gunslinger. If you watch Colorado State football, he's got to cut down on the interceptions. 16 of them last year. That was among the highest in the entire country. Norvell thinks he'll be much improved this year. I got to see it because, again, sloppiness last year. Maybe with some experience, he'll clean that up. One guy that really stood out to me rewatching the Hawaii game and some of the other games down the stretch, this Justin Marshall kid. Played the last 3 games and ran for over 300 yards in just those last couple of games. He's one of the main reasons why their leading rusher from last year, Shield, hit the portal post-spring. Marshall, their highest-graded player on offense per PFF. He's got to become the bell cow, though, because Colorado State had one of the worst rushing offenses in the country last year. That was the negative. Positive was they had one of the better passing offenses in the country, particularly when you look at what they had personnel-wise. Wide receiver Torrey Horton, top 10 wide receiver in the country. And I'm not talking just G5. I'm talking regardless. I mean, as far as production, this is a guy that's coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And to get a guy in this era to come back for another season after going back-to-back 1,000-yard, and obviously Colorado State played in some more high visibility games last year. I'm kind of stunned that he didn't go in the portal. They do lose. I loved their tight end last year, Holker. I thought he was their second-best player on offense. Their second-best wide receiver transferred to Syracuse post-spring. They like the Cincinnati transfer, Donovan Ollie at wide receiver, so we'll see. They got some production to replace their, they need another guy to take some pressure off of Torrey Horton. Otherwise, team defenses are just going to roll over their coverages and stack them up against Horton. Offensive line, 3 starters coming back, led by their right tackle Drew Moss, center Jacob Gardner. Let's flip over to the defense. I thought the best player on Colorado State last year was not on offense, but actually on defense. If you watch their games, defensive end, Muhammad Kamara, ended up getting drafted in the 5th round, 13 sacks. In a few games, he was completely unblockable, a game wrecker. They also lost a really good defensive tackle, Grady Kelly, to Florida State. The positive is they return a safety in Jack Howell, a linebacker Chase Wilson. Between the two of them, they combined for 221 tackles last year. Also back safety Henry Blackburn. He flashed to me. He also was caught up in that cheap shot on Travis Hunter in the Colorado game, but he played well all season. What didn't play well statistically is you got to be better on pass defense than allowing 71.5% completion percentage. I mean, that's like, playing on air. Got to be tighter, especially when you had some pass rush with Kamara and you got some guys that are productive in the secondary. I mean, I was stunned to see that they allowed 71.5% completions. That's got to be better if they want to take that next step. Where they have taken the next step is recruiting. Each of the last 2 classes have been their best finish in the last 20 years. Major upgrade there. They got a wide receiver coming in, Jordan Ross, who's their highest rated recruit in 25 years. Schedule, 7 home games. They get Colorado in week 3. That's CBS Saturday night. Not CBS Sports, CBS National. They should be favored in 6 games at least. It's bowl game or bust as far as I'm concerned for Norvell. Got to get to a bowl game for what they spend. Got a few more teams here as we roll through. Hopefully I can keep it under an hour here. It's going to be close on this one. Let's talk Air Force. A lot of continuity when it comes to coaching staff. Troy Calhoun, get this, entering his 18th season at Air Force. That is more than all the other Mountain West head coaches combined. And he's done obviously a great job. They've won at least 9 games in each of the last 4 full seasons when you throw out the 2020 COVID season. Their OC, Mike Thiessen, 15th season here. Brian Knorr's entering his 3rd season as DC, but he's been on the staff the last 7 years. As much coaching continuity as any staff in the country. In fact, I talked to Troy Calhoun last year in the offseason, and I just flat out, because he's very well respected, and he's got some NFL background back in the day, and I just flat out asked him, why do you stay at Air Force? First said, that's a good question, because I was pretty blunt with it. And he said he loves, first off, he loves the ability to recruit the type of kids that he can get in the Air Force. He loves that. And he also right away said that Colorado Springs is one of the best places to live. So I don't think he's leaving. I think this is he's going to start here and retire here when it comes to his head coaching career. So he's doing a great job. Let's talk last year's team. Started 8-0. You thought they had a chance to get to a major bowl bid. Then their quarterback, Zach Larrier, gets hurt. And, the season goes by the wayside. They lose a couple of games as a significant favorite against Army and Hawaii. And they end up losing their last 4 games of the regular season. They do win the bowl game over a good James Madison team. But statistically, they were legit. 34 in yards per play margin, 23 in yards per game margin, 27 in scoring margin for Air Force, plus 19 in sack margin, plus 2.1 yards in yards per carry margin. They controlled the line of scrimmage. Again, If the quarterback doesn't get hurt, it's an easy 10-11 win team. As far as this year, though, dead last in the country in returning production. However, I would say this, generally speaking, I didn't downgrade Air Force as much as other teams at the bottom of the country in terms of returning production. They got clear systems in place, some of the top coaching continuity in the country, and they're typically not very experienced at the academy. So they usually replace juniors and seniors with juniors and seniors that have been in the program. John Busha is probably the favorite to start a quarterback. He got some snaps last year. Top 2 rushers depart. Michelle and Eldridge really impressed me in the bowl game. Carson's got he played some snaps, so the running back, he's one of the better players coming back on offense. He averaged 7.3 yards per carry. Their top wide receiver, again, you're not getting a lot of catches, but Rosno's averaged 31 yards per catch on his 12 catches last year. He had 3 touchdowns. Calvert is another weapon on offense. He averaged 7.7 yards per carry. Cade Harris, limited catches, but he averaged 36 yards per catch. I mean, they got some playmakers here if they can figure out the quarterback. The concern, obviously, is 0 starters back on the offensive line. They had arguably the top offensive line in the Mountain West last year, so I would say this is the biggest concern on my team. But typically, the service academies aren't experienced at offensive line. They usually replace juniors and seniors with other upperclassmen, so we'll see. Defense has been the strength of the program, along with the rushing offense the last 5-6 years. Last year, 15 in the country in yards per play, 6 in total defense, 12 in scoring defense. The kid that really impressed me rewatching tape, this Bo Ritker kid, unbelievable. 19.5 tackles for loss, number 8 last year. That was his number. Sometimes as I get older, I'm all numbers. I don't remember names very well, but my goodness, number 8 on tape really flashed for them. He departs. Their safety, Trey Taylor, actually got drafted. That's not good. Alex Mock, their leading tackler, gone. Second best pass rusher, P.J. Ramsey's gone. So, obviously your best players are gone, and not a lot to work with. They like this Jack Curtis kid as at defensive end as the replacement for Ritker. They do have an experienced defensive tackle. The Payton kid's really good. Both cornerbacks return. They both have great length. So there's a few guys back. We'll see. Typically speaking, I feel like they're a little bit more confident than the market. The market was very low. In fact, it opened 5.5 on Air Force win total. Too low. If you catch the hint there, that was too low. It got adjusted, but let's just say I was involved on that. Schedule not overly difficult. No Boise State, no UNLV. Fresno and Oregon State are at home. I think they're favored in as many as 7 games. They're not going to win 9. But they're going back to a bowl game, Air Force, this year. Wyoming's next up. Another team with a new coach. Craig Bohl departs 10 successful seasons. He's gone. Last year's 9 wins was the most they had in a season here since 1996. Familiarity as far as the new head coach, Jay Sawville. He was a DC at Wyoming the last 4 years. The new DC this year is Aaron Bohl, Craig Bohl's son. He is a first-time DC, so we'll see how that works out. The new OC, Jay Johnson. He's going to feature a little bit more spread and a little bit more tempo, but I don't think it's a dramatic change. They're just going to be a little bit more up-tempo and a little more passing. Last year, statistically, they weren't as good as 9 wins. They're 4-1 in close games, plus 11 in turnovers. That's usually screams regression. If you rewatch the Texas Tech and App State games, they were very fortunate. Texas Tech's kicker missed 3 field goals. They blocked an App State field goal and returned it back for a touchdown in a very close game. You look at statistically, they were outgained by 31 yards per game last year and somehow won 9 games. So not overly impressive there. I expect some regression. Returning starters, Peasley at quarterback's gone. He was actually good last year. I didn't see this coming from him. 20 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, over 400 yards on the ground. He graded out very well. As far as the guy that's going to replace him, Svoboda, easy for me to say, Evan is his first name. But he's going to wear number 17. And if you know Wyoming quarterback 17, Josh Allen, he's going to look like Josh Allen, at least physically. 6'5", 245 pounds is Evan. They're pretty high on him. We'll see. As far as the receiving core, a lot of the guys are gone. Wyatt Whelan, I like. Their tight end Welch was pretty good. They had a deep threat in Asante who had great speed. They're all gone. But they think they upgraded their wide receiver room through the portal. They like their tight end, John Michael Gillenborg. They expect him to be a first or second team All Mountain West type of player. So they like their receiving room. A big positive is Whaley's back at running back. He had nearly 1,000 yards last year. They like this North Carolina transfer running back, DJ Jones. He stood out in the spring. 4 starters back on the offensive line. Guard Jack Walsh is probably their best player up front. The concern, though, is a little bit of the tackle positions. Frank Crum's gone. The defensive line dominated the offensive line during the spring, so we'll see what happens there. Speaking of the defense, leading tackler Easton Gibbs, he's gone. But I still think this is one of the better defenses in the conference. They're led up front. The defensive tackle, Jordan Bertignoli, Sebastian Harsh, productive players. They did lose Gavin Meyer to USC post-spring. That wasn't good. Wyatt Eckler's back in the secondary. So there's some pieces here. Last year, I mentioned some of them games at home. They went 7 at home last year, beat App State, beat Texas Tech. Fresno State was ranked in the top 25. They beat them. They're going to be tested again at home this year. They got home games against BYU, Air Force, Boise State. Even with the coaching change, win total 6.5. I haven't bet it yet. I mean, I'd be stunned if they didn't make a bowl game. So I think 6.5 sounds about right as far as that win total. So at minimum, it's got to be 6-6 this year back in a bowl game. They're not going to match 9 wins, though. 3 more teams here. Let's go to UNLV, who had a new coach last year and had a historical season. I thought Barry Odom did a phenomenal job with UNLV last year. Most wins for UNLV in a season since 1984. And no doubt, I mean, if you're doing a power rating, it was their best team since then. Both coordinators are back, including Brennan Marion. He's a hot name. He's got that catchy go-go offense. I will say, despite 9 wins, UNLV was outgained on the season and had a negative yards per play margin. Defense wasn't good, even though the offense was. That's not good for the upcoming season. Let's talk the upcoming season. 12 starters back. They welcome in 20 transfers. They got the best transfer class, in my opinion, in the Mountain West. They got 11 power conference transfer kids. So that's going to be a very talented roster. I would say, though, the most important transfers are a pair of FCS transfers at quarterback. That's going to ultimately determine how far this team goes this year. They lose quarterback Jaden Mayava to USC. He was the Mountain West Freshman of the Year last year. I'll be honest, I wasn't a big fan of him last year. I mean, I watch a lot of UNLV football. I mean, some of the most inopportune mistakes at the worst times, consistently, multiple games. I know he's a young player, but I think they'll be okay. And why do I think they're going to be okay? Because I like these 2 FCS quarterbacks. Haj Malik Williams from Campbell, Matthew Sluka from Holy Cross. They're both dual threat. Williams is a better passer. Sluka is a better runner. Both have a ton of experience, multiple year starters at the FCS level. In fact, if I was stack ranking top quarterbacks at the FCS, both of them would have been top 10. So 2 capable guys. Sluka wasn't there in the spring. Malik Williams looked pretty good as far as the spring game. So I think they'll be okay at quarterback. Wide receiver, really good wide receiver. Ricky White should be. He comes from Michigan State. He's good enough to still be at Michigan State, and he'd be an all Big Ten receiver at Michigan State. That's how good he is. He was the 3rd highest graded wide receiver in the country last year. He's had multiple seasons here of really good production, almost 1,500 yards last year. Another kid I really like, this Jacob DeJesus kid. He's only 5'7", 165. If you watched last year's spring game, you could see, hey, this is going to be the name to know as far as a kid coming out of nowhere. Very quality slot receiver. They got out of the JUCO ranks last year. He had no offers from anybody, and they found him. He's also probably one of the most productive return men in all of college football, both punt and kick. So I really like that kid. 3 of the top 4 rushers are gone, but the best guy stayed, in my opinion. Jaden Thomas scored 12 touchdowns as a true freshman last year. So he's back. Speaking of true freshmen, this Greg Burrell kid, a flash in the spring game. I think he's going to play quite a bit. They got an NC State transfer, Michael Allen. He'll play. Keep in mind, a lot of the formations in Marion's offense in the go-go has 2 running backs lined up in unique formations. Their tight end is back. He had a really key. I was rewatching the Air Force game. He had an 84-yard reception. Totally changed that game. Air Force was dominating. They come out of the second half. He gets this big reception, and UNLV makes a comeback and wins a big road game. Offensive line, 3 starters back, led by the right tackle, Tiger Shanks, probably one of the better offensive linemen in the Mountain West. Let's flip to the defense side of the ball. They were wore down at the stretch. Allowed in the last 4 games, 39 points per game, 500 yards per game. On the season, they allowed 6.3 yards per play. That was 115 in the country. the positive is they did force a lot of turnovers, 27 of them last year. That was as many as anybody in the country. On the positive, Jackson Woodard, a linebacker, he had over 100 tackles last year. He's back. They really like Cameron Oliver. Nice size. He's 6'1". He had 5 interceptions. I thought he really stood out in the bowl game against Kansas. But really outside of Oliver, and they got another kid coming back in Baldwin, UNLV thought they had a weakness in the secondary because what they do, they went out and brought in 6 transfers in the secondary, all of them from Power 4 conference schools, led by Tony Grimes, so a former 5-star kid. So they really want to shore up that secondary, to say the least. I think they're a little thin at defensive line after losing guys like Darius Johnson, so we'll see if they can get maybe a guy or two in the portal this summer. Here's the problem with UNLV. I actually think they're better than last year's team as far as I'm looking at the returning production and the talent level. But it's the most difficult schedule probably in the history of UNLV football. 4 power conference teams, plus Fresno State, plus Boise State, the 2 best teams in the Mountain West. Again, I think they might be better than last year, but they're not going to get to 9 wins, UNLV, this year. Let's talk one of those 2 best teams. We've got 2 left. Fresno State is my number 2 team in the Mountain West. Jeff Tedford back from his second health scare in the last 4 years. So this is probably my biggest concern. I'll just lead. I won't bury the lead. How healthy is he? Because he missed a bowl game. He can coach, obviously. I mean, he's 9-3 in his career in bowl games. They got the same coordinator, so there's some continuity there. Some regression concerns. 5-1 Fresno State was in close games last year. Statistically, they weren't a 9-win caliber team. Very average. You look at yards per play margin, 56th in the country, 60th in the country in yards per game margin. To me, that screams like a 7.5-win team, not a 9-win team. You look at the returning production. Mikey Keene's back at quarterback. I thought his best game was in the bowl. I think he started like 13 for 13 in that game. He's finally healthy. He wasn't 100% down the stretch. Good quarterback. I would say, I'm thinking in the top of my head, yeah, I would say Mikey Keene's probably the best quarterback coming back in the Mountain West this year. Sherrod at running back's one of the better running backs in the Mountain West. He's one of the more underrated running backs in all, a group of 5. They lose their top wide receiver, Fresno State does, but Moss is back. I like this Josiah Freeman kid on tape. He impressed. Kid that really impressed on tape rewatching last year's game. Their tight end, Trey Watson, he's number 84. Big loss in the transfer portal. He's at Texas A&M. Big pickup for the Aggies. He was originally going to Washington. 4 starters are back on the offensive line. Mose Vavao, easy for me to say, Mose Vavao at right guard is probably their best player there. On defense, probably 3 of their better players, Carlton Johnson, Maurice Norris, Lavelle Bailey, all gone. As far as production, all those guys are gone. They do return their top 2 tacklers. They really like this defensive end, Devo Bridges, defensive tackle Jacob Holmes. Rewatching a few games, they stood out to me, so I think they'll be okay up front. Defense really kind of wore down last year. They allowed 150 yards per game more in conference than non-conference. That'll be interesting to see. Speaking of interesting things to see, they bring in a transfer who, in some circles, was the number 1 high school player in the country a few years ago. He's a defensive end. Former 5-star recruit Corey Fuhrman comes in from USC. Been a total bust so far in his career. I'm just wondering, new scenery, fresh start, dropping down in weight class as far as competition. Does he finally flash? Because, again, coming out of high school, some recruiting services had him as the number 1 player. Forget number 1 defensive end, defensive lineman, number 1 overall player in the country in some circles. Big pickup, so we'll see. As far as the schedule, they open at Michigan, Fresno does, close at UCLA. They're probably in the middle 10 games, probably favoring in 8 or 9 of them. So they're going to be right in the mix as far as making it to the Mountain West Championship game. Let's talk the top team in the Mountain West. I'm not going to bury the lead. I think it's a top team as far as a power rating goes in all of G5. It is the Boise State Broncos. Last year, better than their record. 1-4 in games decided by 7 points or less. That says they were better than 8-6. Their Fresno State, Colorado State loss is very misleading. I mean, not to open up a wound again, but, man, the Fresno State game, rewatching that, my goodness. So many. They had 5 or 6 game-changing plays went against them. And that one, we had a best bet on Boise on this podcast, and I cannot believe that didn't get home. Remarkably unlucky bad break there. Speaking of unlucky bad breaks, Colorado State, lost on a Hail Mary there. So that screams positive for this year. And statistically, they were in the top 50 in the country, yards per play margin, yards per game margin, scoring margin, plus 20 in sack margin. When you looked at the last 3 games of the regular season with Spencer Danielson as the interim coach, that was 3 of their best performances of the season. Big reason why he got promoted to the permanent position. New OC, Dirk Cutter, ton of experience. He was the OC here 2 years ago, saved their season, taking over the play calling. He's taking over the play calling here. They had a late guy ended up leaving, I believe, to Missouri, was it? Yeah, I think it was Missouri. But Dirk Cutter's been a head coach here at Boise, Arizona State, in the pros. He's been a long-time offense coordinator. Really experienced guy, loves Boise. Great hire. Speaking of great hires, I like Tyler Stockton, the new DC. If you're familiar with it, he's from Ball State. I loved what he did with Ball State's defense. Shenander, I should say, is also back at DC. He was on the staff last year. You look at the returning experience, they have it, 15 returning starters. They also signed the top recruiting class in the Mountain West for the 13th time in the last 14 years. So a lot of good things here with Boise State as far as the coaching staff, which I think upgraded after they fired Andy Avalos. I think there was some locker room issues there. So upgraded coaching staff, upgraded experience, upgraded talent level. It's a lot of good things. Let's talk specifics. They do lose their quarterback, Taylor Green. He went to Arkansas. Got to tell you, looked pretty good in Arkansas in the spring game this year. Madsen's back at quarterback. He got plenty of snaps last year. Had 61% completion percentage, 9-3 ratio. He did sit out the spring with knee injury. Bigger news is they welcome a former 5-star high school recruit, Malachi Nelson from USC. He's expected to be the starter at some point this year. I don't know if he opens the season as a starter. We'll see, but he's going to start some games this year. Ashton Jenney, a running back, might not have been a 5-star coming out of high school. He plays like a 5-star. He's the best group of 5 player, regardless of position in the country. 1,800 yards as far as rushing and receiving last year, 19 touchdowns, highest graded running back in the country per PFF. Halani's gone. He gives him a little bit of rest. George Halani was the number 2 back. They need to find another back behind Genty to give him some rest. I think it's going to be this Dubar kid. He ran well last year when he got limited snaps. Looked good in the spring game. They like this true freshman Gaines. So I think he'll be fine at running back. They were a very rush-heavy offense when Danielson took over as the interim and permanent coach. 262 yards per game the last 4 games. Got to be a little bit more balanced. I think they will be this year. Now, on the surface, you're going to say, how? They lost all their top receivers. I think they'll be better. This Prince Strawn kid flashed on tape. He averaged 26 yards per catch. They get Cables back from injury. He missed all last season. Chris Marshall, you might be familiar with the name, the number 1 JUCO player in the country. Major talent. Was he former 5-star, but also major off-field issues. He was dismissed from Texas A&M and Ole Miss. This is his last chance. If, and it's a big if he can stay out of trouble, he should be an instant impact. You're talking about the possibility for Boise State's offense to have a former 5-star quarterback throwing to a former 5-star wide receiver, and arguably not a 5-star coming out of high school, but Genty might be the best group of 5 player in the entire country at running back. That's a very talented offense at this level. Offensive line's got 3 starters back. Their left tackle, it's probably their best player. Cutter's also extremely high on the wide receiver, Austin Bolton. They really like their tight end, Lauder. So very talented offense if they can put it together. Defense actually is the more proven commodity. 12 of their top 14 tacklers are back. Defense did slip a little last year compared to at least what they were in 21 and 22. A couple guys, they got some talent on this side of the ball too. Guys that popped on tape. Number 91, a defensive end, that Hassanin kid, 12.5 sacks. At linebacker, number 10, Andrew Simpson, 15 tackles for loss. Both those guys are first-team all-conference players. They bring in a couple of good transfers. This Woodard kid from Ball State, I think he could start at defensive end. Irby from Cal looks like he's going to be a starter at cornerback, filling in for Jalen Clark, who was dismissed from the team. The guy that really got a lot of his name kept popping up during the spring, the safety Ty Benefield, they're really high on. So a lot to work with on defense, to say the least, and with a couple of decent coordinators. Special teams as good as it gets. Dalmas, a kicker, 80 career field goals. He's going to set the all-time record if he stays healthy this year. 80 career field goals with an 89% accuracy. that's as good as it gets in the country. And speaking of that, James Ferguson Reynolds at punter averaged 49.7 yards per punt. 49.7 average per punt last year. Really good. I mean, very high on this team. They're not as, this isn't a Kellen Moore, Chris Peterson Boise State team, but it does feel like what Brian Harsin had there. And I mean, he did, everyone remembers what he, the lack of success at Auburn, but Harsin was successful at Boise State. I mean, he won at least 9 games all 6 years. Schedule, I think, works out for Boise State. They're favored in 11 of their 12 games, Oregon being the exception. There is no Fresno State. They get Washington State and Oregon State at home. I love this team. I probably would have given this out as the win total best bet, but it's pretty pricey. If you're okay with laying minus 175, minus 180, on an 8.5 win total, be my guest. I like the over. So that's kind of a little bit of a bonus bet there. I think this team is really legit. I don't know if they're, the true clear-cut favorite as far as to get to the playoff, because Liberty's got a cakewalk schedule and could go undefeated. And Memphis' schedule is probably a little bit less difficult than Boise's, but I think they're really going to make a run to get to that first playoff bid as far as the top group of 5 conference champ, Boise State. Easily the favorite in this league. Let's get to the best bet, though. Right at an hour here, so I didn't go too long. We're going back, though, to the bottom of the league. And you're going to think, Brad, we're going to go, you just made a great case for Boise State. Why would you want to mess with New Mexico? I'm going to tell you why I'm going to mess with New Mexico. It's an historic win total in the wrong way. It's 1.5. Again, a 1.5 win total is something, and I've been betting these now for 10-plus years that they've actually put them out for all 130-plus teams. And I've only seen it a couple times. And usually when you get a 1.5 win total, it screams, hey, this is by far the worst team in the country. New Mexico is not by far the worst team in the country. In fact, I think there's 5-6 teams worse than them. Now, the negative is this. Why is it a 1.5 win total? It's because they've had the toughest schedule in the country among group of 5 teams. They're going to be an underdog in every game this year. Probably a touchdown underdog in 11 of the 12 games. I even got them a double-digit underdog against an FCS team in Montana State in the opener. With that being said, that doesn't mean that they're going to win 0 or 1 games. If you put, this is how you do win totals, folks. If you have a projected point spread on each individual game and give them a 20% chance to win that game, a 10% chance to win that game, a 40% chance to win that game, you put that into the schedule, plug all that in, I get 2.5 as far as a season win total. I think somehow, some way, a very good coach in Bronco Mendenhall gets this New Mexico team to 2 wins. They won 4 last year and were actually statistically better than 4-8. That was a team that probably flirts with bowl eligibility last year. I know they lost a lot, but they still got a lot coming back on defense. They got a playmaker at quarterback, and they upgraded a head coach. We're going over the win total. Over 1.5 wins for New Mexico. Best price you can find right now is minus 155. So we are laying some juice here. 160s available, some 170s in the market. Let's call it 160 because you got one lower than that, a few higher. We'll call over 1.5 wins, New Mexico, minus 160. You're going to say, Brad, why are we doing this? Well, a teaching moment, I will say, at the opposite ends of the spectrum as far as the win totals, because you really see a huge spectrum when it comes to college football. Like sometimes you see 10.5. I've seen 11.5 win total on a 12-game schedule. Not seen it this year. 10.5 is the highest, but at the polar opposites, the 1.5s, the 2s, the 2.5s, and the 10.5s, 11.5s at the high end. Every half win means more. Typically, you're looking at a half win meaning 70 cents on an average win total in college football. But at the lowest of lows and the highest of highs, man, when there's not much not much variance possible, a half win means probably closer to 100 cents. So I'm not afraid of laying the minus 160 juice here on a team that'll probably be an underdog in all 12 games. We are going to go with over 1.5 wins on New Mexico, your best bet. I haven't forgot about the MAC. We'll probably double back at some point and give out 2 best bets in a future podcast. And speaking of that future podcast, next week we're going to tackle the Sun Belt. I think there's a lot of value in Sun Belt win total, so I'll probably mention quite a few bets that I made as far as the season win totals there. We'll have a best bet or 2 there. Keep in mind, with a New Mexico over 1.5, ticket hopefully in your pocket. Let's go ahead and get yourself to the window. For Todd Fuhrman and Payne Insider, I'm merely Brad Powers filling in for the guys this week. We'll talk to you next week as we talk some about football. Take care. Enjoy your week.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.